So we're going to take kind of a different approach today with this session to talk about kind of some of the strategies for fixing problems on your websites, how you want to approach prioritizing the work that you have in front of you. And so the main thing we're going to cover is what we're calling the 5S approach to improving accessibility. As everyone knows, the state uses the Arizona management system, and 5S is one of the lean tools that is part of the Arizona management system. So we thought it would be good to kind of go through and use that as an example of how you can approach the challenge of improving accessibility on your website. There are a lot of different strategies that you can choose, everything from kind of a tools first approach, trying to focus on the errors, not the noise. Some of these others that I have listed there, we'll briefly touch on today, but today is primarily about that 5S approach. And really, the first time you log in to optimize, the first time you start working on accessibility problems, it can feel like you're climbing a mountain, right? I wanted to get an image of boiling the ocean, but we're Arizona, we don't have oceans, so you get a beautiful image of Lake Powell. It's a really big problem initially when you first approach it, and sometimes it can feel overwhelming. So the recommendations that we're making here is kind of this step-by-step approach and using the 5S method in order to take it kind of one thing at a time to gradually melt the iceberg, if you will. So that's 3 different useless analogies. So I hope all of my English majors are happy I figured that out, because it's very difficult for IT people sometimes to do that. So 5S is, this is kind of the graphic. It'll show you what we mean when I say 5S. It's a agile terminology. It stands for sort, set in order, shine, standardize, sustain. And we'll go through all of this and kind of talk about what we mean for each of these. Originally, this was designed for manufacturing, and I want to emphasize, I am only a white belt in lean. I am nothing greater than that, but the great folks at the Government Transformation Office are experts in lean, and they're more than willing to help you learn about lean methodologies, Arizona management system, and 5S. So hopefully I don't say anything too wrong. If any of you are actually a blue belt or a green belt or better, please don't point out all the mistakes I'm making with my analogy by trying to lump in 5S with accessibility. But the point behind the methodology is, how do we organize what we're doing in order to create order, cleanliness, efficiency, reduce waste, make it easy to understand? This is based off of, I already mentioned the 5 Japanese words, and we'll actually show them coming up, I believe. But it's a way for us to make sure we're walking through the process in a way that will be sustainable, reduces waste, and improves accessibility. So the first one is sort. So the idea behind the first S, sort, is about eliminating anything that's unnecessary. Don't have your workspace cluttered with stuff. In the world of accessibility, this turns into the concept of how big of a footprint do we have online, and how much can we clean out stuff that we don't need online. So we're not trying to fix issues, but instead we're actually reducing what we have. So the Optimize tool has a feature called Inventory that will show you all of the different web pages from its perspective that you have online. If you're in one of the agency platform websites provided by ASET, if you visit your site URL /sitemap.xml, you can see every page published on your website. That's kind of your online footprint. That's all the different pages you have online. The first step in all of this is to sort, meaning reduce the footprint. Look to see if it actually needs to be online. Remove any content that doesn't serve a purpose. Don't try to be fixing a bunch of content that doesn't even need to be there. If you have orphaned content, meaning a web page that's not linked anywhere, it's just kind of there and published, clean out that content. There's actually another tool within the optimized system, and we'll create a video on how to use this, but you can generate the page links report to identify all of for every page on your website, how many other pages are linking to that site. And so if you only have a few pages linking to one page, it may be an indication that page isn't needed, and just unpublish the page. Fastest way to fix any accessibility problems that are found on that. So that's kind of what SORT is. I do want to emphasize that the optimized tool, Google search, any outside tool, is scanning it. So it's only able to find pages that are linked from other pages. So the site inventory tool and the page links report only indicate the pages the tool can find. There may be those orphan pages that don't have any inbound links to them. They're still published. They still have accessibility errors. They're just not being seen within the tool. So while the tool can't find it, there are ways within your website where you can find those pages. So we recommend, as part of SORT, that you review your inventories, compare your site inventory to your site map, look at pages that you can get rid of first, and kind of eliminate all the unnecessary items. And in alignment with that, if it's a document, ask yourself the same question. Does that document need to be online? Does it need to be a document, which is much more difficult to make accessible, or can it be converted into a web page? If it's a PDF form, does it need to be a PDF form, or can it be converted into a web form? Though that's the type of sorting that we're talking about. So the next step is to set an order. And I kind of want to emphasize, this isn't the only way to do things. There is no right way. But as I go through this is just one way to go about doing it, right? So the key in all of this is to make sure that you have some type of repeatable process. So Seiton, I shouldn't try to speak Japanese because I don't know how to pronounce this, but set in order. This is about organizing everything that's left, doing it in a way that makes it efficient, easy to access, and ensure that everything has its place. So from the accessibility lens of all of this, that means focusing on one check at a time when you're using the optimized tool. Have your entire team working on that same check. That way you can learn from each other. By doing it one check at a time, you can learn who's affected by that check, what that check is about, why it's important, where you can find the problems on your site and how to fix those problems. And it allows you to kind of organize your approach to solving problems, but keeping your entire team all on the same page at the same time and gradually learning more about accessibility. The biggest kind of fear in the eyes that we see folks have when they first start looking at this is that big mountain of issues they have to address, and it all seems so very technical. By putting things in an order and gradually taking them one at a time, it allows you to improve your skill sets, keep everybody on the same page, and gradually build out that knowledge base so it's not as intimidating. And of course, just the whole repetition of fixing the same problem. If you focus on one problem and you go through the optimized tool and your website and you review that same problem 90 different times, it kind of, that building the repetition helps you remember it and helps you avoid making that mistake in the future when new content gets added to the site. This is the next one, the set in order. So set in order really kind of goes to the point of, all right, going to fix the problems, right? So this is about developing a plan for how we're going to tackle the items on the site. And in the digital dash, we've kind of already described that. And I think every agency has started doing that with the Find Your Five approach. Some of the keys to doing it, to making sure it's set in order, is creating structured time and processes for finding and fixing the errors, going through, making sure it's scheduled so that every week or every 2 weeks you have a set time where your team meets together, works on issues together, follows kind of that process to start reviewing items and fixing items. And then, identify, make sure you've got all the resources you're going to need for that particular check. Do you all understand it? Do you have the access to the tools that you need to have to resolve the check? And of course, within Optimize, there are several different tools you can use to approach each check. So making sure you know what that check is. All right, so the shine. This is kind of where the work comes in. Shine is about making sure your work area and equipment, if from the 5S approach, it's are you cleaning your work area and your equipment regularly? Are you maintaining that environment? So from this standpoint, from the accessibility lens, this is where we're actually going out there and fixing the issues. We already found the issues. We identified the 5 that we're going to start with. This is when we start going out and actually fixing the issues. So this is going to be the shortest slide, but honestly, this is where all the work is done. I want to take a minute to talk about what that work looks like in Optimize, though. And this is a question we've heard a lot the last couple of weeks as people have been getting used to Optimize. There are basically 2 functions you can take in the Optimize tool to make a change or to take action. The first is either labeled as reviewed or ignored. Whenever you see one of those action buttons, that if it says review or it says ignore, what you're telling the Optimize tool is that you either don't want to know about the error anymore, or you reviewed the item and you know your website is accessible on that issue. And so you're telling the tool to stop scanning for that check or that item and not report that as a problem again. Change it from being a, quote, failing issue to being now passing. So that's what the reviewed item, reviewed check kind of button does within Optimize. Sometimes it's also called ignore. It just tells the scanner, mark this as pass and stop scanning for it. The other button that you'll see is the mark as fixed button. That tells the system a different kind of approach. That is saying, we actually made a change for our website. Please scan that website again. And the next time the site is scanned, it's going to look to see if the change was made. And if everything looks the exact same as it was, that issue is going to go from passing right back to a failing check, and it'll still show up. And so for items like reviewed items, if you click on it as mark as fixed, but you haven't made any changes, it'll temporarily increase your score and say everything's great, but it's going to come right back around the very next week, show back up as reviewed, and you'll have to do the step all over again. So I hope that makes sense how I've explained it. But those are the 2 primary actions that you would see within Optimize. When you're working on kind of shining your environment, doing the fix, we recommend and ask that you please use all the resources that are available. Read through the handbooks, understand the check, have a standard work checklist. And for what we have in the handbook right now, we have standard work checklists for everything. But there's lots of online help guides. We've got the videos, and we're going to start producing more videos for you to be able to see. There's lots of resources to help you on this as you're working through. But I would say the most important resource is your own team. Build your knowledge base, because the primary goal we want out of the digital dash is not just to have the number go up, but it's to build a group of people within the state that understand how to keep their websites accessible, so that we're not trying to do this whole process again 1 year from now, starting all over, but we're building a sustainable process. Which brings me to the next S. standardize. So in the 5S world of things, this is about establishing all of the procedures and standards for maintaining everything. It's about consistency and repeatability. So if we translate this into the accessibility lens, we're not just updating the optimized tool, and we're not just kind of making corrections and fixes on the website. Instead, we're going through, we want to also create documented processes. So do you already have a documented process for how to add content to your website? If not, start with that. Have your team create a documented process. If you do have it, does it include steps for reviewing and fixing accessibility problems? Make sure that the tools your teams use to keep your site up to date, remind them every time new content is created or added, we should be reviewing it. You can use a tool like the Optimize browser extension in order to do a single page scan and make sure everything looks good and identify problems. But it's much better to have a tool that as that piece of content is being created, the person who's doing it is being reminded how to appropriately create the page. They're checking for common problems. They're getting them fixed right away. Which brings me to the last thing is, if you have a documented process and it does talk about reviewing and resolving accessibility errors, also include a checklist of errors that you see most often on your website so that you can remind them to fix those before publishing it and before someone has to go back through and, oops, looks like I had an extra space there, before somebody has to go back and fix an issue after the fact. And this brings us to our last, to the next phase of standardize, still on standardize. Every time you're out there using your standard work, making new content on your website, keep that standard work updated. As technology changes, as your websites and tools change, keep your standard or your standards updated so that you're doing it correctly the first time. A lot of what we're having to do right now can fall under the word remediation. We're going back to either fix a problem or update a system to show that there's not a problem. And this is essentially because of poor quality. With the website, our content was put up there initially, and maybe at one point it was solid, but over time, as new errors get introduced, those are new problems that have to be fixed, right? So if we start associating all of these remediation activities about fixing poor quality, then we're recognizing that this is all rework we're having to do. This is one of the forms of waste that we talk about in the Arizona management system. Our whole job as State of Arizona employees is to find ways to eliminate waste, to avoid this type of rework and remediation. None of us I know on this call want to do poor quality work, and certainly none of us are paid to do poor quality work. So instead, we need to make sure what we're creating from the very beginning takes accessibility in mind, and that we're not building out any type of a failure stream. We want to optimize for success. And that means making sure the first time we do it, we're including accessibility throughout the entire process. I think I had an extra one there. So that brings us to sustain, which is the last of the S's. This is about developing the habits and discipline over time to maintain everything we put together on the first four S's. It's ensuring we have a culture of continuous and process improvement. So it's about, at the end of Digital Dash, don't stop using the optimized tool. Establish that process where every 2 weeks or once a month, depending on what your score is, you're in the habit of using the tool, continuously reviewing new items. We want to avoid getting bogged down. I know many of you, this is the first time you've used the tool. you haven't looked at the tool in years. There's probably lots of items that have to be reviewed and cleaned up. If we continuously do it, we have the discipline to keep all of this activity in place afterwards, we're not going to get bogged down again in the future trying to do all of these review items. And then the other part to sustaining and keeping all of this working is to make sure we're sharing our knowledge, our resources with others, that we're not just keeping it as single subject matter experts that know something, or institutional knowledge where it's great, everybody here now understands it, but 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, when there's lots of new people in here, are there the resources and tools that they're going to need to understand how to do this? So as you're going through the digital dash, think about how in your agency you can sustain all the progress that you've made throughout the dash over time. And learn from others is the same. Let's see. That the whole point behind all of this is let's not get caught up in trying to chase the score, right? This isn't about fixing our numbers. It's about fixing our problems. If we put in place each of those 5S items and we approach it from that perspective, instead of simply, my agency's at 65%, I need to get it to 95%. If we focus on those problems and not the numbers will take care of themselves. We'll see those numbers start to go up. So that is the 5S approach. And I mentioned there was a couple of other approaches that I was going to cover here, but why don't we take a pause before jumping into this? Are there any questions people have? Any of the S's that I ran through too fast? You can just raise your hand or come off mute or type it into the chat. Alan.
All right. I want to follow up on what you said about chasing the score. And I think that's really important to remember. We're setting a target, right? And there is a statewide target of 85% accessibility. And eventually, we hope to meet that target at a statewide level, but really focusing on the work and making the improvements is going to help you increase that score much faster than just trying to see how you can get the score up. Any change in improvement, and the only way we know if we're improving is by having a score, right? So we have to have some sort of benchmark so we know that we are improving. But any kind of improvement is going to be considered a success. If it's some agencies might have 1,500 pages, 2,000 pages to a website, and some agencies might have 100. So there can be a discrepancy there, and the amount of fixes that could possibly occur. And that's why I just want to reiterate what Justin said about doing the best that you can. Make the improvements, because really in the end is to make the site as accessible as possible for the people that use it. And our score is just a means of knowing that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, great point, Alan. Thank you. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the 5S conversation, that's only one strategy. There's lots of different ways of boiling this ocean, or Lake Powell again. Beautiful Lake Powell. There are other strategies, and depending on where your agency is at, it may not make sense to do the checklist item by checklist item approach that I was recommending. So you may want to adapt it to what works best for your agency. And that's really what that, I've already forgotten the name. I think it was the second S, but it was the planning S, if you will. It may be you want to adapt that using one of these other approaches. So there's 4 others that I'm going to briefly talk about today. And we may have specific trainings on how to use these approaches in the future. But the first one, optimize tools first approach. So what this approach is, it's not really a strategy the way the 5S one was. This is just each approach you take here may dictate which tool and optimize you use. So the different ways of approaching solving accessibility in Optimize. Check by check, which is the one that we're recommending. It's how our handbook is structured, and it, as we discussed earlier, it benefits your team by everybody working on the same check at the same time, having all the resources, and it really aligns very well with the 5S strategy, but it can be used by the errors not noise strategy that we're going to cover. This is where you use the checklist tool and Optimize. You focus on one check at a time, and you fix all the problems related to that check. The other kind of tool approach you can take and Optimize is going page by page. With this approach, you're going to fix all the errors on one page at one time, and you do it page by page. This approach is much better for more advanced users. People are used to the optimized system, understand accessibility, who know about all the different checks and how to fix them. Because you have already got the learning base set, this works really well with the highest priority pages first strategy that I'm going to talk about. But that is a way that you can optimize, or you can organize your approach on this using the page tools in Optimize. The third one is called chunk by chunk, or code chunk by code chunk. This is where, instead of looking at one check across every page of your site, or all checks across one page at a time, you're looking at a piece of code, fixing all the accessibility issues around that code snippet that are found across all of your site. Again, it's a way that you can quickly clean out a bunch of stuff if you know kind of where you're going. We do have a video on how to use Fast Track for this approach. Again, it's more for the more advanced users if you already know about things, but it is useful some with the 5S approach that we talked about, but can also be used with some of the other strategies here. So depending on how your agency chooses to approach this problem will change how you use the optimized tools and which tool to use within Optimize. So I mentioned a couple of different other strategies. So the focus on errors, not noise strategy. This is one where instead of looking at all the review items, which are really just noise because they don't necessarily indicate an accessibility problem, you start on the other end of that spectrum. You start looking at the errors first, the little ladybug icon in Optimize. And most sites, some sites will have, 4 or 5 errors versus 20 to 40 review items. With the errors first approach, you're looking at fixing those accessibility errors. And the biggest benefit of this approach, of course, is you're making improvements. It's a known accessibility problem on your website that you're fixing. It also has you focus on accessibility as opposed to accessibility compliance, because you're fixing the error, not just increasing your score. In fact, fixing those errors may only move your score up slightly, but you're fixing the stuff that's broken. There are some drawbacks to this approach. One is that errors really do tend to be more technical in nature, and they're going to require the involvement of multiple teams, not just your content editors, content authors. In many cases, they may be problems that you can't actually fix, that another team has to do. And that's one of the reasons we're not recommending this approach during Digital Dash, because our primary focus during Digital Dash is on content improvement and creating sustainable content improvements. I already mentioned it's outside the direct control of content creators. And really, it's fixing the errors is great. I'm not trying to say don't, because at some point, those errors do have to be fixed. But by focusing on those, we're not necessarily creating that kind of culture of understanding we talked about. But again, it's an approach. You can just ignore all the noise and optimize and move to that later. The other issue is making sure, when you're fixing the errors, are you creating a permanent fix to a problem, or are these errors that reoccur? So most of the time, when you fix those errors, it is a permanent fix. It's not something that's going to keep coming back up. But if you take a error first approach, you just have to be cautious to make sure that you're creating something sustainable at the same time. The next approach is, I think, really more useful for large agencies or large websites where the size of your iceberg is really big, right? This is taking your highest priority pages first. So you want to prioritize the content that you're going to be fixing based off of the type of content it is and how much traffic goes to that pages. So this, and again, some of this can be done in tandem with each other, right? But with this approach, you would start by first making your homepage fully accessible, fixing everything on your homepage first before moving on to other pages, because that's always going to be your most visited page. It's certainly your most visible page. But then any service pages that you have, pages where you're offering a service to public, you may want to prioritize those next. Any forms that have to be filled out where the public is trying to interact with you. These are just kind of suggestions on how you might prioritize pages. But with this approach, again, you're fixing all of the problems at once on one page on your highest priority pages, and then moving on to the next and to the next, which of course has the positive of you're helping us the most number of people with every single change, because those are the highest visited pages. But there's some drawbacks to this approach. Some of it is that your hidden pages may actually have most of the problems on your website. And so you're kind of kicking the can down the road for fixing those problems. And quite honestly, even if it's only one person who is affected by an accessibility problem, that's a problem that needs to be addressed. Just because a page doesn't get a lot of visitors doesn't mean that that information is not important to one person who can't now get it. So the downside to this approach is it's not prioritizing fixing the problems, it's prioritizing popularity. All right, the last approach, and this is one that we're thinking about putting on a training for in a future session. This is an approach about archiving, and it's not actually an approach about how to fix accessibility problems. This is an approach for how to avoid enforcement actions for accessibility problems. The concept of archiving is there are certain content, certain web pages and forums that you don't have to make accessible online. And I want to be careful with this one, because I said you don't have to make it accessible online. It's not that you don't have to make it accessible. The positives, of course, is that it reduces the risk of enforcement action from the Department of Justice, but there's a bunch of drawbacks. And because we don't really have time to go into all the details today, before taking this approach, you really have to understand the DOJ enforcement rules around this and what archiving allows, and what's gonna still get you in trouble even if you thought about it. So obviously the biggest drawback is archiving does not improve accessibility. It allows the problems to continue. Certainly not what we want to do. It's not going to improve your accessibility compliance score. Your score is still going to look bad. there are very specific requirements that have to be met in order for something to be archived. It's not as simple as saying, this content's all archived. You actually have to meet certain criteria for it to be there. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, you still have to offer an alternative method for access to that information. So if you've got a PDF that's really just an image of a document from 30 years ago, it's not used for anything, but you need it online for whatever reason, etc. Archiving allows you to keep it online in an inaccessible way, but you still have to provide a way for the public to get an accessible copy of that information. And so hopefully I've made it clear that this approach isn't going to fix any problems. It is an approach that may be necessary for some agencies in order to reduce risk of enforcement action, but there's a bunch that has to go into it in order for it to work. So with that, I'm going to jump to questions, and I see that Brian has one already. Even with archiving, the meeting web pages have been the bane of his existence. Absolutely. Because you've got lots of meeting recordings that need transcripts. You have PDFs that may or may not have been accessible. Those pages, right after a meeting, there's probably 100 people that's looking at that page. And 3 weeks' time, there's one person a year looking at that page, but it still has to be accessible. I realized halfway through that, Brian, that wasn't actually a question, but thank you. Alex asked, are unpublished pages still flagged by the tool? No, they're not. If a web page is unpublished, and so that this doesn't apply to everyone, it applies to people with content management systems. But if a page is unpublished, it's not visible to the public. The optimized tool can only scan and see pages that are visible to the public. It essentially acts as an anonymous website visitor. So what we're looking at in Optimize is what our customers see when they visit the website. Yes, unpublished is different than archiving, by the way. Archiving is a different topic entirely from unpublished. Angelica's question, can you clarify what counts as a page? And that really depends on the system that you're using for your website and whether you're talking about a page on the website versus what the optimized tool counts as a page. And I believe Angelica is actually referring to that latter. What do we mean when we talk about a web page? Because with content management systems, it's not really a physical page like you have with the document. Instead, it's a database with lots of information that all gets assembled on one visible page for the public. I think the easiest way to think about it is when you are on your website and you visit a unique URL, everything that gets displayed on that unique URL is considered a page. So the homepage of the ADOA website is doa.az.gov/HOME. And I visit that, everything being displayed, when I see that URL, that's a page. And in Optimize, that's what it's considering as everything there.